Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Tarkoff, and I'm the Chief Customer Officer here at Blue Prism. It's great to be with you all, and I'm very much honored to have Michael Herrick with me today from Bain. He's a partner there and spends a great deal of his time working on automation with his customers and a view towards the future of what digitization is going to look like. It should be pretty interesting hearing Michael's thoughts from a lot of the insight he's getting from his clients, especially from the CFO ranks out there. Without further ado, let me turn it over to Michael.
Hi, Jet. Great to be here.
Good to have you. So, Michael, just setting the stage a little bit. You've been out there, and I know we've talked before, and you've been seeing a number of your customers, and especially the CFOs that you've been interacting with. And it'd be really great to start things off by getting a view of their perspective on as they look across this landscape now, especially since the last 90 days or so. And how are they seeing things given what they were looking at, which started out at a pretty healthy start of 2020, and now how is their perspective shaping up given what we've just been through these last 90 days?
Sure, Jet. We're talking to a whole host of executives out there, not just CFOs, but we're also talking with CEOs of companies, chief operation officers, chief HR officers, CIOs, obviously, and of course CFOs. I spend a lot of my time talking with CFOs. I lead our automation capabilities for Bain, so not just CFOs, but a broad range of executives as well. And to your point, I think many have been expecting, some sort of downturn in 2020 to some extent. Of course, no one predicted anything like we have today. But I think most were expecting after a very long bull run that we would have some sort of slowdown, just not as fast and as severe as it has been.
So do you think that the ones that have been impacted by some of those early disruptions that happened in the beginning of 2020, have you seen that help prepare any of those customers? And if they have any short-term lessons that you've seen from some of those companies, some of your customers, that helped them so far through this COVID scenario?
Sure. I mean, I think for many, prior to the pandemic, and let's take, for example, finance organizations in any industry, whether it be financial services to telecom to healthcare, most finance organizations were going through some sort of transformation, right? Many of the trends that I mentioned and disruptions as well have been causing, many finance organizations to transform, for example, their FP&A functions, the accounting and transactional processes as well, to become, more valued business partners. And I think what this pandemic has done has really, tested how much progress these organizations have in fact made. And so let's take, for example, finance, as we mentioned. For many finance organizations, historically the focus has been very much focused on the P&L. But recently with the pandemic, obviously the focus has now shifted more to cash and liquidity. And so, and beyond that, it's been everything from thinking about, for example, business continuity issues, right? And thinking about just delivering core finance services, for example. And in many cases with work from home, companies have just had to adapt to new ways of working in this crisis.
What have you seen that's interesting? You bring up BCP or business continuity plans, and I'll touch on those here in a moment. What do you think's been we've heard about a number of the challenges, right? That, every company is going through the work from home, and we're all trying to figure out the technical aspects, the process aspects of how to keep people tied together if they're not together as they may have been. And then how do you keep the morale up, and how do you keep the connectivity and the collaboration? Have you seen anything that you think's been pretty unique out there that, some of our customers and the attendees of Blue Prism World might benefit from, that you and your colleagues at Bain have seen thus far?
Sure. I think what we've seen that's really unique is that despite the pandemic and working from home, for example, while there have been some business continuity issues, by and large, a lot of work has been removed and things have worked just fine. And so I think what many organizations have discovered is that by being sort of more focused and prioritizing work and sort of eliminating what many perceived as high value work, in fact, was sort of lower value work, that operations can work just fine. So if you're thinking about that CFO population, for most Fortune 500 companies, they've been able to close the books just fine. For many of my clients, for example, to pay the bills, to collect money from customers, to deliver core finance services each and every day. And I think what this has meant is that for many companies out there, they're starting to question whether much of the work that has been put say to the side here during the pandemic, should that work in fact come back. And so many long-held beliefs that many of these organizations have had are starting to now be questioned in the wake of this pandemic. And I think, Jet, that also means automation as well.
That takes me in a great segue in, Michael, that, thinking about the business continuity plans, right? Every company usually has them. The bigger ones have to have them because they're required by, most of the time, minimally, it's going to be required by their shareholders and their boards. And on the other extent, from the industries that I came from in financial services, they're required by the regulators. So when you're out there talking with your colleagues, the companies that you all interact with, how well did those BCP plans hold up for them during this? And any thoughts collectively or individually about what are BCP plans even going to mean to these organizations as they go forward? Are they even going to be existing, and are they going to change in some way, given the fact that have they learned a lesson about, can you even plan for the kinds of things that may be coming down the pike? Because again, who would have thought about this, right? Who would have thought that your offshore backup plans would have taken out every facility that you can't roll over to? It's these kinds of things, again, that you and I have talked a bit about, right? So I'm curious to see, what your thoughts and your colleagues' thoughts have been around these kind of things as you interact with your customers.
Right. Without a question, the topic of resiliency has become much more prominent now. And that's everywhere. So that's, supply chain, obviously, given all the disruptions that I mentioned, not only with this pandemic, but, previous disruptions like US-China trade war, et cetera, but also within finance functions, HR functions. And so it can't just be about, for example, managing costs or improving service quality. There needs to also be a focus around resiliency as well. And I think this pandemic has really put that more to the forefront. So for many of our clients, to your point, many of them caught by surprise when there were issues with offshore operations, for example, and where do they turn? And so I think it's not just business continuity plans. It's just the very fundamental nature of doing, for example, strategic planning, right, or financial forecasting. There's just so much more uncertainty, and our point of view is that it's very difficult to predict exactly what's going to happen in the future, but you have to be flexible and prepared and look for those key triggers and figure out how you're going to react to them when you do see them, as opposed to trying to predict perfectly what the future might hold.
And you mentioned automation, and of course, our whole conference is about automation. Blue Prism is about automation. We're 19 years old now, and we started out as a pretty rudimentary role-based type of platform. We're now much more sophisticated, utilizing artificial intelligence in our platform itself. We're able to connect to all these other artificial intelligence and intelligent automation toolkits that be able to expand and make our digital workers much more robust than what I would have even thought 5 years ago when I was a customer. As you're looking out there and the interaction, you're listening to the conversations that are going on around the C-suite that you all are interacting with, is the automation challenge or the automation opportunity, how is that being now discussed and brought into we better start thinking a little bit differently? Or is it being discussed as we better start thinking a little bit differently about digital workers, automation in general? Because again, as your point's spot on, it's just about uncertainty. And there's some advantages, of course, with the resiliency when you have an increased correct use of automation to provide that. So it'd be very insightful, I think, for everyone to kind of get the purview that you all have seen in those discussions that you're hearing.
Right. I think without a question, automation has gone way up in terms of the priority list. So just to provide a data point here, we, Bain, look at adoption of automation, and we've been looking at this and surveying customers globally, not just our own clients, but companies more broadly, every 2 to 3 weeks during this crisis. And what we've seen here is a steady progression upward around the appetite to embrace automation more. So, for example, in our last survey, 84% of all companies across all industries are planning to accelerate their adoption of automation to some extent. This is more pronounced in some industries. So, for example, financial services, it was about 93%. In telecom and healthcare, much higher as well. So it differs by industry, but without question, some industries, in particular financial services, are really stepping up their automation agenda.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty impressive. And again, you can probably think through those that, where you have distributed workforces and you have, elongated processes, again, to help with follow the sun. But unfortunately, depending on where you put those elongated workforces in certain locations, that follow the sun model does not necessarily work very well, especially if you have the kind of situation that was driven by the pandemic. And again, I think there's something to be said for that. And I think that quantifying it the way that you all do on that very, very methodical and very rapid, if you think of it, not very many people will go out and survey every 2 to 3 weeks. But I think it's very astute of you all to think about how fast things are changing. Again, another point to point out that the way that people are beginning to look at the world, you have to be able to pivot that quickly. So
yeah.
when
by the way, I was going to say also, Jen, I do think what's really interesting is as we pivot from, the first couple months where we were just really focused on, how do I get through this pandemic? How do I respond? And how do I make sure that we have, business continuity, to your point? It's really transitioning now to thinking about recovery and the future. And so as a result, automation has become much more front and center as we think about that recovery and moving forward. And I think what's also interesting is that for many of our clients, automation isn't just about cost savings. It's about other things as well. So, for example, it is about resiliency. So if we had issues, for example, with our offshore operations, we already had a plan in place. Maybe that plan was not as rigorous as we'd hope, but we always hope that we would, for example, automate much of that offshore work as opposed to keep it in an offshore location. So now we will accelerate that. I think what's also really interesting is how do you think about automation as well to not only deal with things like during the pandemic, say, a surge in volume in the call center, but also for things like in the recovery, how might we use automation, for example, to win back some of the customers that we might have lost during the pandemic? How do we reach more people where it'd be very difficult to sort of do this with, people and have, the digital workforce, as an example, to be a partner in that journey to win back many of the customers that might have been on the sidelines here or lost during this pandemic.
No, that's a great observation. And again, I think that it just reinforces, Blue Prism's value system around the automation, where this isn't about the elimination or the reduction of humans in the workforce. It's about the collaboration, the partnership, and allowing the humans to thrive in the workforce by partnering them with digital workers to make them stronger and better, so the humans are capitalizing on things that humans are fantastic at doing, and letting the digital workers do the things that they're very, very good at doing. So you have a better proposition and offering for your customers. And I think that's absolutely spot on. You know, as you were talking about the way that you're seeing the movement of automation and the way people are thinking and driving that agenda faster, it struck me as you probably also are thinking or seeing now changes in the way of maybe some of the behaviors of some of the C-suite members. They have to work from home too. They're not collaborating the same way that they used to collaborate. You know, any things that you all as an organization are seeing that maybe could help our audience that's watching this as they're trying to think about making business cases? What is it that might help provide, you know, C-suite that says, yes, I need probably to do more in automation, but they're probably still a little too far away, you know, between the people that are doing the automation work down in their organizations? Any counsel that you might offer that, as you're hearing the conversations that are going on at that level, that somebody down here doing automation could say, your bosses, it would be really helpful if they heard, well, anything that you could think of that could strike that chord with them?
Sure. What I would say is, and I think probably many of the folks in the audience understand this, but you know, automation or being successful at automation is about a lot more than just technology, right? And so thinking about everything around the technology to actually make this happen. So everything from the sponsorship, you know, who within within the leadership team of your organization is really that, you know, proponent of automation, all the way through, you know, are you selecting the right opportunities? Do you have the right delivery capabilities? Are the right, you know, incentives in place? All the way through to what happens after automation is deployed. Are you actually getting the full benefits from automation? It's similar a little bit to, if you think about outsourcing in the past, you know, you can move a lot of work, you know, to an outsourcer, but at the end of the day, to get that business value from that outsource relationship, you know, you have to change your underlying business processes. And so it's the same thing here with automation as well. So what's left behind after you automate something, digital workers working with human workers, is that process redesigned? What does that look like? The business benefits that you thought that was going to come from automation, how did you make sure that you actually realize that value afterwards? You know, we hear many people say, well, you know, I've picked the right automation opportunity. I've got, you know, that automation out in the field. I've got that in production. But we didn't really realize the business benefits. And at the end of the day, if you don't realize the business benefits from that, and again, it doesn't have to be just about cost, then many people question, why did I do automation in the first place? So always tying back to, you know, why am I doing this and how am I going to demonstrate the value from doing that automation? If you really start there and then work your way backwards, we think that, you know, your odds of success around automation will go up.
So Michael, we're nearing the end here, and so my final question is the 2 or 3 significant learnings, you know, that you would have taken away from what you've been hearing over these last 2 to 3 months, and how you've seen organizations changing and looking at the future, and what our audience and our customers can take with them and help their organizations. What might those 2 or 3 things be that you can share with us?
Sure. First, I would say challenge all long-held beliefs that your organization has had in the past. You know, put everything on the table. So it doesn't have to be just work that's automated. It could be processes, policies that you have. I think many people are questioning, why are we doing the work the way that we're doing it? And, you know, take a long, hard look at it. Number 2 is, while we always talk about the new normal, I think we all know that, you know, as we recover, you know, old habits die hard. So now is the time to create the change. Otherwise, this opportunity could pass you by. And then the third lesson I would say is automation. Automation should be on that agenda. I think many people who thought, automation wouldn't work in a certain situation or we couldn't get as much value as we thought, I think are really questioning those long-held beliefs. And I'd make sure that automation is front and center on the agenda.
Michael, that's fantastic. And it's a great way to wrap this up. Thank you again from all of us at Blue Prism. Thank you today for me personally. For anyone who's looking at some advice and needs some guidance, please contact Michael Herrick at Bain. And we thank you very much again. And have a great day, Michael. Everybody here at Blue Prism World, enjoy the rest of the conference. And thanks again. Cheers.